A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. Chapter 1. But you may say, we asked you to speak about women and fiction. What has that got to do with a room of one's own? I will try to explain. When you asked me to speak about women and fiction, I sat down on the banks of the river and began to wonder what the words meant. They might mean simply a few remarks about Fanny Buttery, a few more about Jane Austen, a tribute to the Brontes and the sketch of Hawthorne personage under snow, some witticisms of possible about Miss Mitford, a respectful allusion to George Eliot, a reference to Miss Gaskell, and one would have done. But at second sight the words simply not so simple. The title Women and Fiction might mean, and you may have meant it to mean, woman and what they are like, or it might mean woman and the fiction that they write, or it might mean woman and the fiction that is written about them. Or it might mean that somehow all three are inextricably mixed together, and you want me to consider them in that light. But when I began to consider the subject in this last way, which seemed the most interesting, I soon saw that it had one fatal drawback. I should never be able to come to a conclusion. I should never be able to feel that is, I understand, the first duty of a lecturer, to hand you, after an hour's discourse, a nugget of pure truth to wrap up between the pages of your notebooks, and keep on the mantelpiece forever. All I could do was to offer you opinion upon one minor point. A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction, and that, as you shall see, leaves the great problem of the true nature of woman, and the true nature of fiction unsolved. I have shirked the duty of coming to a conclusion upon these two questions. Women and fiction remain, so far as I am concerned, unsolved problems. But in order to make some amends, I am going to do what I can to show you how I arrived at this opinion about the room and the money. I am going to develop in your presence, as fully and freely as I can, the train of thoughts which led me to think this. Perhaps if I lay bare the ideas and prejudices that lie behind this statement, you will find that they have some bearing upon women and some upon fiction. At any rate, when a subject is highly controversial, and any question about sex is that one cannot hope to tell the truth, one can only show how one came to hold whatever opinion one does hold. One can only give one's audience the chance of drawing their own conclusions as they observe the limitations, the prejudices, and idiosyncrasies of the speaker. Fiction here is likely to contain more truth than fact. Therefore, I propose making use of all the liberties and licenses of a novelist to tell you the story of the 2 days that preceded me coming here. How, bowed down by the weight of the subject which you have laid upon my shoulders, I pondered it, and made it worth in and out of my daily life. I need not say that what I am about to describe has no existence. Oxbridge is an invention, so is Fernham. I is only a convenient term for someone who has no real being. Lies will flow from my lips about there may perhaps be some truth mixed up with them. It is for you to seek out this truth, and to decide whether any part of it is worth keeping. If not, you will, of course, throw the whole of it into the waste-paper basket and forget all about it. Here, then, was I. Call me Mary Betton, Mary Shetton, Mary Carmichael, or by any name you please. It is not a matter of any importance. Sitting on the banks of a river a week or two ago, in fine October weather, lost in thought, That colour I have spoken of, women and fiction, the need of coming to some conclusion on a subject that raises all sorts of prejudices and passions, bowed my head to the ground. To the right and left, bushes of some sort, golden and crimson, glowed with the colour. Even it seemed burnt with the heat of fire. On the further bank, the willows wept in perpetual lamentation. Their hair about their shoulders, the river reflected whatever it chose of sky and bridge and burning tree. When the undergraduate had oared his boat through the reflections, they closed again, completely as if he had never been. There one might have sat, the clock round lost in thought to call it by a prouder name than it deserved, and let its line down into the stream. It swayed minute after minute, hither and thither, among the reflections and the weeds, letting the water lift it and sink it until you know the little tug, the sudden conglomeration of an idea at the end of one's line, and then the cautious holding of it in, and the careful laying of it out. Alas, laid on the grass, how small now, insignificant, this thought of mine looked, the sort of fish that the good fisherman puts back into the water so that it may grow fatter, and he one day worth cooking and eating. I will not trouble you with that thought now, though. If you look carefully, you may find it for yourselves in the course of what I'm going to say. But however small it was, it had nevertheless the mysterious property of its kind. Put back into its mind, it became at once very exciting, important, and as it darted and sank, and flashed hither and thither, set up such a wash and turmoil of ideas that it was impossible to sit still. It was thus that I found myself walking with extreme rapidity across the grass plot. Instantly, a man's figure arose to intercept me. Nor did I at first understand that the gesticulations of curious-looking object in a cut-away coat and evening shirt were aimed at me. His face expressed horror and indignation. Indistinct rather than reason came to my help. He was a beetle. I was a woman. This was the turf, and there was the path. Only the fellows and scholars were allowed there. The gravel, the place before me, such thoughts were the work of a moment. As I regained the path, the arms, the beetle sank. His face assumed its usual response, and though turf is better walking than gravel, no very great harm was done. The only charge I could bring against the fellows and scholars of whatever the college might happen to be was that in protection of their turf, which has been rolled for 300 years in succession, they had sent my little fish into hiding. What idea it had been that had sent me so audaciously trespassing, I could not now remember. The spirit of peace descended like a cloud from heaven, for it was a spirit of peace dwell anywhere. It is the courts and quadrangles of Oxbridge on a fine October morning. Strolling through those cottages past those ancient walls, and roughness of the present seemed smoothed away. The body seemed contained in a miraculous glass cabinet, through which no sound could penetrate, and the mind freed from any contact with facts, unless one trespassed on the turf again, was at liberty to settle down upon whatever meditation was in harmony with the moment. A chance would have it some stray memory of some old essay about revisiting Oxbridge in a long vacation brought Charles Lamb to mind, St. Charles and Thackeray, putting a letter of Lamb's into his forehead. Indeed, among all the dead. I give you my thoughts as they came to me. Lamb is one of those most cognito one to whom one would have liked to say, "Tell me, then, how you wrote your essays." For his essays are superior even to Max Beerbohm's. I thought, with all their perfection, because of that wild flash of imagination, that lightning crack of genius in the middle of them, which leaves them flawed and imperfect, but starred with poetry. Lamb, when came to Oxbridge perhaps 100 years ago, certainly he wrote an essay, the name escapes me, about a manuscript of one of Milton's poems which he saw there. It was Lycidas, perhaps. The Lamb wrote how it shocked him to think it possible that any word in Lycidas could have been different from what it is. To think of Milton changing the words in that poem seemed to him a sort of sacrilege. This led me to remember what I could of Lycidas, and to amuse myself with guessing which word it would have been that Milton had uttered, and why. It then occurred to me that the merry manuscript itself, which Lamb had looked at, was only a few hundred yards away, so that one could follow Lamb's footsteps across the quadrangle to that famous library where the treasure is kept. Moreover, I recollected, as I put this plan into execution, it is in this famous library that the manuscript of Thackeray's Esmond is also preserved. The critics often say that Esmond is Thackeray's most perfect novel, but the affection of the style, with its imitation of the 18th century, hampers one so far as I remember, unless indeed the 18th century style was natural to Thackeray, a fact that one might prove by looking at the manuscript and seeing whether the alterations were for the benefit of the style or of some sense. But then one would have to decide what this style and what its meaning, a question which, by here I was actually at the door which led to the library itself. I must have opened it, for instantly there issued, like a guardian angel, barring away with the flutter of black gown against the white wings, the pricking, silvery, kindly gentleman who regretted in a low voice as he waved me back that ladies are only admitted to the library if accompanied by a fellow of a college or furnished with a letter introduction. That a famous library has been cursed by a woman is matter of complete indifference to a famous library. Venerable and calm, with all its treasures safe locked within its breast, it sleeps compassionately and will, so far as I am concerned, to so sleep forever. Never will I awake those echoes, never will I ask for the hospitality again, I vowed as I descended the steps in anger. Still an hour remained before luncheon, and what was one to do? Stroll on the meadows? Sit by the river? Certainly it was a lovely autumn morning. The leaves were fluttering red to the ground. There was no great hardship in doing either, but the sound of music reached my ear. Some service or celebration was going forward. The organ accompanied magnificently as I passed the chapel door. Even the sorrow of Christianity sounded in that serene air more like the recollection of sorrow than sorrow itself. Even the groanings of the ancient organ seemed lapped in peace. I had no wish to enter, and I the right, and this time the verger might have stopped me, demanding perhaps my baptismal certificate or a letter of introduction from the dean. But the outside of these magnificent buildings is often as beautiful as the inside. Moreover, it was amusing enough to watch the congregation assembling, coming in and going out again, busying themselves at the door of the chapel like bees at the mouth of a hive. Many were in cap and gown, some had tufts of fur on their shoulders, others were wheeling in bath chairs. Others, though not at past middle age, seemed creased and crushed into shapes, into so singular that one was reminded of those giant crabs and crayfish who heave with difficulty across the sand of an aquarium. As I leaned against the wall of the university, indeed seemed a sanctuary in which were preserved rare types which would soon be obsolete if left to fight for existence on the pavement of the Strand. Old stories of old deans and old dons came back to mind, but before I had summoned the courage to whistle it, used to be said that if the sound of a whistle, old professor, instantly broke into a gallop. The venerable congregation had gone inside. The outside of the chapel remained. As you know, its high domes and pinnacles can be seen like a sailing ship, always voyaging, never arriving, lit up at night and visible for miles, far away across the hills. Once, presumably, this quadrangle was a smooth lawn. Its massive building had the chapel itself was marsh too, where the grasses waved and the swine brutaled. Teams of horses and oxen, I thought, must have hauled the stone in wagons from far countries, and then with infinite labor the grey blocks in whose slade I was now standing were poised in order one on top of another, and then the painters brought their glass for the windows, and the masons were busy for centuries up on that roof with putty and cement, spade and trowel. Every Saturday somebody must have poured gold and silver out of their leathern purse into the ancient fist, for they had their beer and skittles, presumably of an evening. An unending stream of gold and silver, I thought, must have flowed into this court perpetually to keep the stones coming and the masons working, to level, to ditch, to dig, and to drain. But it was then the age of faith. The money was poured liberally to set these stones on the deep foundation, and when these stones were raised, still more money was poured in from the coffers of kings and queens and great nobles to ensure that hymns would be sung here and scholars taught, lands were granted, this were paid, and when age of faith was over and the age of reason had come, still the same flow of gold and silver went on. Fellowships were founded, lectures endowed, only the gold and silver flowed now, not from the coffers of the kings, but from the chests of merchants and manufacturers, from the purses of men who had made, say, a fortune from industry, and returning in their wares bounteous share of it to endow more chairs, more lectureships, more fellowships in the university where they had learned their craft. Hence the libraries and laboratories, where the observatories, the splendid equipment of the costly, delicate instruments which now stand on glass shelves. Where a century ago the glasses waved and the swine rootled, certainly as I strolled around the court, the foundation of gold and silver seemed deep enough. The pavement laid solidly over the wild grasses. Men with trays on their heads went busily from staircase to staircase. Gaudy blossoms flowered in window boxes. The strains of the gramophone blared out from within the rooms within. It was impossible not to reflect. The reflections, whatever it may have been, was cut short. The clock struck. It was time to find one's way to luncheon. It is a curious fact that novelists have always ways of making us believe that luncheon parties are invariably memorable for something very witty that was said, for something very wise that was done, but very seldom spared the word for what was eaten. It is part of the novelist's convention not to mention soup and salmon and ducklings, as if soup and salmon and ducklings were of no importance whatsoever, as if nobody ever smoked a cigar or drank a glass of wine. Here, however, I shall take the liberty to defy that convention, and to tell you that the luncheon on this occasion began with soles sunk deep dish, over which the college cook had spread a counterpane of the whitest cream, save that it were branded here and there with brown spots, like the spots on the flank of a doe. After that came the partridges. But if this suggests a couple of bald brown birds on a plate, you are mistaken. These partridges, many and various, came with all the ratutinous sauces and salads, the sharp and sweet, each in its order, the potatoes thin as coins, but not so hard, the sprouts foliated as rosebuds, but more succulent, and no sooner had the roast and its ratune been done with than the silent serving man, the beadle himself, perhaps, in the milder manifestation, set before us wreathed in napkins to convention which rose of sugars from the waves. To call it pudding, and so relate it to rice and tapioca, would be an insult. Meanwhile, the wine glasses had flushed yellow and flushed crimson, had been emptied and been filled, and thus by degrees was lit halfway down the spine, which in the seat of the soul, not that hard little electric light which we call brilliance, as it pops in and out upon your lips, but the more profound, subtle, and subterranean glow, which is the rich yellow flame of rational intercourse. No need to hurry, no need to sparkle, no need to be anybody but oneself. We are all going to heaven, and Van Dyck is of the company. In other words, how good life seemed, how sweet its rewards, how trivial the grudge or that grievance, how admirable friendship and society of one's kind is lightening a good cigarette, one sunk among the cushions of the window seat. If by good luck there had been an ashtray handy, if one had not knocked the ash out of the window in default, if things had been a little different from they were, one would not have been presumably a cat without a tail. The sight of that abrupt, transcendent animal padding softly across the quadrangle changed by some fluke of subconscious intelligence the emotional light for me. It was as if someone had let fall a shade. Perhaps an excellent hawk was relinquished its hold. Certainly, as I watched the Manx cat pause in the middle of the lawn, as if it too questioned the universe, something seemed lacking, something seemed different. But what was lacking, what was different? I asked myself, listening to the talk. And to answer that question, I had to think myself out of the room, back into the past. Before the war, indeed, has set before my eyes a model of another luncheon party held in rooms not very far distant from these, but different. Everything was different. Meanwhile, the talk went on amongst the guests, who were many and young, some of the sex, some of that. It went on swimmingly, it went on agreeably, freely, amusingly, and as it went on, I set it against the background of the other talk. As I matched the two together, I had no doubt that one was the descendant, a legitimate heir of the other. Nothing was changed, nothing was different, save only here I listened with all my ears, not entirely to what was being said, but to the murmur of current behind it. Yes, that was it. The change was there. Before the war, at the luncheon party, like this, people would have said precisely the same things, but they would have sounded different, because in those days they were accompanied by a sort of humming noise, not articulate, but musical, exciting, which changed the value of words themselves. Could one set that humming noise to words? Perhaps with the help of the poets one could. A book lay beside me, and opened it. I turned casually enough to Tennyson, and there I found Tennyson was singing. There has fallen a splendid star from the passion flower at the gate. She is coming, my dove, my dear, she is coming, my life, my fate. The red rose cries, she is near, and the white rose weeps, she is late. The larkspur listens, I hear, and the lily whispers, I wait. Was that what men hummed at luncheon parties before the war? And the women? My heart is like a singing bird, whose nest is in the water shoot. My heart is like an apple tree, whose boughs were bent with thickened fruit. My heart is like a rainbow shell that paddles in a house and sea. My heart is gladder than all those, because my love is come to me. Was that what the women hummed at luncheon parties before the war? There was something so ludicrous in thinking of people humming such things, even under their breath at luncheon parties before the war, that I burst out laughing, and had to explain my laughter by pointing at the Manx cat, who did look a little absurd, poor beast, without a tail in the middle of the lawn. Was he really born so, or he had lost his tail in an accident? The tailless cat, thought some are said to exist in the Isle of Man, a rarer than one thinks. It is a queer animal, quaint rather than beautiful. It is strange what a difference a tail makes, you know, the sort of things one says in a luncheon party breaks up the people of finding their coats and hats. This one, thanks to the hospitality of the host, had lasted far into the afternoon. The beautiful October day was fading, and the leaves were falling from the trees in the avenue as I walked through it. Gate after gate seemed closed with gentle finality behind me. Innumerable beetles were fitting innumerable keys into well-oiled locks. The treasure houses was being made secure for another night. After the avenue, one comes out upon the road, I forget its name, which leads you, if you take the right turning along the Fernam, but there is plenty of time. Dinner was not till 7:30. One could almost do without dinner after such a luncheon. It is strange how a scrap of poetry works in mine and makes the legs move in time to it along the road. Those words, "There has fallen a splendid tear from the passion flower at the gate. She is coming, my dove, my dear," sang in my blood as I stepped quickly along towards Headingley, and then switched off into another measure. I sang, "Where the waters are churning up to the weir. My heart is like a singing bird, whose nest in the water shoot. My heart is like an apple tree." What poets, I cried aloud, as one does in the dusk. What poets they were! In sort of jealousy, I suppose, for our own age, silly and absurd though these comparisons are, I went on to wonder if honestly one could name 2 living poets now as great as Tennyson and Christian Rossetti were then. Obviously, it is impossible, I thought, looking into those foaming waters, to compare them. Their very reason why the poetry excites one to such abandonment, such rapture, is that it celebrates some feelings that one used to have, at luncheon parties before the war perhaps, so that one responds easily familiarly without troubling to wreck the feeling or to compare it with any that one has now. But the living poets express the feeling that is actually being made and torn out of us at the moment. One does not recognize it in the first place. Often, for some reason, one fears it. One watching it with keenness and compares it jealously and suspiciously with an old feeling that one knew. Hence the difficulty of modern poetry, and it is because of the difficulty that one cannot render more than 2 consecutive lines of any good modern poet. For this reason that my memory failed me, the argument flagged for want of material. But why, I continued, moving on towards Headingley, have we stopped humming under our breath at luncheon parties? Why has Alfred ceased to sing, "She is coming, my dove, my dear"? Why has Christiana ceased to respond, "My heart is gladder than all of these, because my love is come to me"? Shall we lay this blame on the war? When the guns fired in August 1914, did the faces of men and women show so plain in each other's eyes that romance was killed? Certainly it was a shock, to women in particular, with their illusions of education and so on, to see the faces of our rulers in the light of the shell fire. So ugly